Hello, and welcome back to yet another stream of Boomeadow Builds A State of Anarchy. We are back, having built what is essentially the Feywild, the material plane, and we are actually working on what is known as Nethraeg, which, if you've been here before, you would know that this is my version of the Hells. So over the last few sessions we have been working on this, actually building it out, fleshing it out, all of that kind of jazz. We have the different circles of hell in my world, just like most D&D worlds. We do have the circles of hell in a descending order, but I'm not using the Wizards of the Coast names and things like this. We have predominantly based a lot of mine after the various 7 deadly sins plus a couple extras. So we have Purgatory, we have Lisner, which is the Circle of Lust. I have to get my list to actually remember the names because that would be helpful. We have Lisner, which is the Circle of Lust. We have Nimis, the Circle of Gluttony, which is that wonderful candy-coloured nightmare that you can see before you. Girihaksha, the Circle of Greed, obviously it's gold because all that glitters is gold. Junpilka, which is Wrath. Dictor, which is Sloth. Gezamog, Envy. Calvamas, Pride. And then right in the centre we have Varot, which is Treachery. While treachery in and of itself is not necessarily one of the 7 deadly sins, it is where obviously they keep the worst offenders in this particular situation. It was once an entity known as the Titan King, an ancient eldritch deity who was related to and I suppose created as one of the old eldritch Linorm gods. Linorm are basically the really big precursors to dragons, so think your world serpent, Jormungandr, things like that. Orberus, and he obviously, way back in my world lore, he had basically tried to defy the original god of creation, who went by the name of Zarus, which I know that Zarus, I believe, is in 3.5, but I did create my own world lore around that as well. So they were essentially the first pantheon of the world, but they were not the creators of the world. The creators of the world were actually the young draconic gods, elemental draconic gods, and they had created the world basically. And then eventually how long have I been working on this homebrew world? Officially, this particular version of it I have been working on for probably about 2-3 months now, just making the world maps and things like this. The actual world lore and everything like this has actually spanned, this will be the 4th campaign set in this world, but I've actually had 3 campaigns set over the last 6 years, which when I started designing the world and everything like this, it started in what became the 2nd era of the world. Then I had a group play through the 3rd era of the world, post an event called the Starfall event, which essentially destroyed the world as a lot of people knew it. Now I have a group on Tuesday who is going through the 1st era of the world, so they're actually dealing with the eldritch deities and a big draconic game of Zorvental after the events of the Titan War, and then the Titan War is what led to the events in the 3rd campaign, the campaign that was set in the 3rd era of the world. And so this will be the 4th era of the world after the event known as the post-merge event, in which the Material Plane, the Feywild, and the Hells have basically been essentially pulled all to the Material Plane, but they kind of parallel over each other. So it's still a form of plane shifting, but they're all on the Material Plane of existence, overlapping each other, while still being their own entities, which is why when you look at the world maps, they all have relatively the same land masses and shapes that will that have been pulled through, basically. So yeah, and thank you for the question, Golden Glow. It's wonderful to have you here. Yeah, so I've been building this world for quite a while. Yeah, it kind of gets to that point that eventually you just have to kind of start playing in it. I did the very traditional thing when I first actually started DMing. I actually hadn't really DM'd before. When I think maybe I'd run a 6-month campaign for the first time, and it kind of all spanned from there. And yeah, so I did the very traditional thing which is suggested in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is I started with one town. I created the world map, and insofar as it was just a map with town names and stuff on it. But none of the towns were fleshed out or anything like that. And I started out with one really vague lot of world lore, which was the elemental dragons, because it was D&D. So I had actually been watching I think it was a documentary one night that was called The Water Realm. And I went, that's a really cool concept. And so I started designing this world. And incidentally, we take inspiration from things that we watch and stuff that we like. And so quite a number of my players did recognize that, as we went on and we played in it and things like this, they started to realize that it did have a little bit of a Avatar: The Last Airbender, because of the way that the nationalities were broken up and everything like this. Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I take a lot of inspiration from different mythos in the world, just because I find some of the real world mythos really fascinating, and they're really fabulous stories to tell. So yeah. And yeah, it does just kind of get to a point where you're like, well, I eventually need to start, otherwise I will never play in my world. I like these trees, I'm fairly certain. And part of the reason that takes so long to build these maps is I am obviously trying to, because this is the first part of the Hells that I'm making, I don't know what trees I'm using. I don't have a set design really that I want for them yet, which means that all of the other quarters of this map will eventually be a lot faster to build. Is that pink going to go? Because this is a circle of lust, I just want to make sure that these and this is the thing, I don't know how I feel about that pink. I think I might save the cherry blossoms for the gluttony layer. I also have some other trees, some really nice fey trees. I like these kind of red, what actually are they? They are maple trees. I thought so, red maple. I like the red trees. Okay. And also, you know, having a look at different... there's a little bit of a focus involved. I do have like some little notes and things that I kind of reference and I want to reference here. But it's also a slight level of winging it because I don't really know what I kind of want to do with it yet. But I think, because this is a circle of lust, my notes that I've got for this is I think I want it to have a little bit of this volcanic, because this is probably, in my opinion, one of the areas that probably looks a little bit like the closest to hell in terms of fiery passion and things like this. But I think I want to use some of these red rock mesas and things like this as well. Have a kind of a bit of a desertous kind of feel to it. The hard part is just figuring out where I'm going to actually put things. Like, I actually really like the way that that's been built up, but I don't know if I want that there. I try not to put anything too close to the edges of the map, and I kind of fill them in a bit later. Once I have all the maps together, just so that I can make that transition really smooth. I use Incarnate, which is an online website. They have a really cool free aspect to it, but obviously because I build these maps quite a lot, I do get the pro subscription, which is what allows me to have all of the access to the assets and things like that. Plus also it has this really cool thing where you can actually add your own assets. If I come all the way down the bottom here, you can see that this is how I kind of get some of my yes, thinking about that. So you can actually add these as transparencies, so you can line things up, things like this. But as you can see, I also have some what looks like skyscrapery things kind of going on, because the actual focus of this world is actually going to be the Feywild aspect. So Feyaware is going to, because it is futurist, a little bit more futuristic, they're a bit more advanced into their technology now. After 4 generations, well, I say 4 generations, it's more like 4 eras. So the Feywild is going to be very steampunky feel, whereas Anthalamir, which has had the opportunity to build and grow, they're going to be a bit more cyberpunky. My version of Hell is also very bureaucratic, so it is basically a giant business state, I guess. Where did I find those mesas? I think up. And obviously I make a lot of notes as well as I go on to make sure that I'm using consistently the same size of things as things go, and, you know, just playing around with it. But yes, you've probably noticed that there are certain naming conventions as well. Some are very obviously. Purgatory is kind of one of these areas here where there are some things that are kind of like tongue-in-cheek jokes and things like this. But for example, if we actually look at some of the names in the last region, names like Euphoria, Fervor. I have 2 Euphorias. That is, I love it when I notice things like this. Because it does happen occasionally. Euphoria and New Euphoria. Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I imagine I'm going to run out of names though, so yeah, it's not the first. Yeah, I've heard about Wonder Draft. And obviously, once I've finished building the world map, I actually go on to build each of the town maps, which is why I've got some skyscraper assets that I've been building and drawing and things like this. But it is a very long process to draw, like, yeah, the maps and the assets and things like this. And I don't always get the time to do that. But I've been slowly working on it to have enough assets to be able to build really cool towns. But I've realized in my perfectionism of trying to do that, I'm probably not going to need a lot of those skyscraper assets for this part of the world, because the game will actually be starting in the Feywild portion. So, yeah, we're not going to have to necessarily think about that. You know what? We'll go with that. Like I said, it is a slight grown-up game in the fact that there are little tongue-in-cheek kind of things like Covet, Licorice, Lech Vale. So obviously, Passion, clearly, you know, this whole passion area. The reason that these mountains are pink is because on one stream I did put it to a poll for my followers. What colours would they like to see the mountains? And they wanted them hot pink. So we made that work. And yeah, so I do, I do get my followers' opinions. And hello, Tape Player. Yeah, I like getting my followers' opinions and seeing what they want to see in and around the world. And Ludstead, yes. Oh, my favourite one, Golden Glow, is in the first iteration map of the world that I actually ever did, I had put down some hill assets and I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought it was a really nice positioning for the hills and everything. Aesthetically, it felt really good. And so ever since that has happened, the players saw something I didn't, and so this is how we ended up with the butt hills. Apparently this looks like a person laying down on a bed, this kind of layout. And so this is how the in-world players joke kind of ended up living forever now. So we have, obviously, the butt hills, as they call them, with Beggar's Hole. Yeah. There is also... I made the mistake of allowing a player to name a town, straight up. This is how we ended up with a town named Borkakai. Which is fine. I think it's spelled Borkkaa. Borkkakkkai. But yeah, no, they made a whole world lore behind it, and I'm like, why do I do this to myself? Why do I let you do this to me? But yeah, no, this is what they want to do, and if that's the way that they do want to find their fun in it, who am I to judge? As long as it's, and especially because we're going to be streaming this version, like this game, there will have to be obviously a level where we do rein it in a little bit, some of the, adultiness of it. While I love that, I know that there is... Well, that's what I've thought, but we've also had... the media land thing has actually happened in this world, which is why we have ended up with an area called the Starfall Islands. There are a lot of floating islands. That was the original world. And it was through the machinations, and it kind of happened through the machinations of the Dark Quarry, which in my setting, the Dark Quarry, or the Quarry race, who make up the Kalashtar, if you're aware of the Kalashtar kind of world lore mythos, they're actually an alien race in my world that came from a place called Dalkor, which was essentially because of the way that they can communicate, and they have that telepathy that we see in the Kalashtar and things like this. And obviously the Dark Quarry are more of like possessor people, as opposed to the Kalashtar, who are more of a symbiotic relationship. And because of that, it meant that the Dark Quarry had essentially been in a prison moon that circled their... yes, they had been in a prison moon that circled their planet. And then the draconic god of greed had basically come and consumed their planet, which obviously threw the moon out of orbit, and it went rocketeering through space and ended up on this world, in which the Dark Quarry realised that they could essentially manipulate the world to control it. And it's through that we ended up with the campaign that was in the third era of the world. I like that, but I think I want it a little bit more visible. Yeah, I kind of have always viewed it though, as long as within reason. Like, it's not that I don't want my players to be silly or anything like that, because obviously, you know, it's their game too, and I would much prefer that, you know, we have those tongue-in-cheek jokes, and, you know, if that's the type of way that they want to play and stuff like that, they can do that too. You know, because it's a collaborative game. There are areas where I do draw the line, which obviously all of those kind of rules are set out early on. Yeah, I do set those rules out very early on about, like, what's tolerated, what's not tolerated. There are some aspects that obviously we just don't use for entertainment because it's, you know, I don't think it's necessary. But that, for example, like, if my players want to have in-character romances or establish those relationships, they are very welcome to do so, obviously with the intention that we do fade to black after a certain point, because, like, certain scenes just make everyone uncomfortable, and it's like, because it's a group game and everything, it ends up feeling a bit like watching your parents, and that's a bit weird. So yeah, but it is very much a case of we just want everyone to have fun, and that includes me as the DM, it includes them obviously as the players. So yeah, and that's all really important. As long as we kind of work together and collaborate to create that story, then that's what matters. Well, that's exactly it. And I mean, and it is very much a fade to black if it's inherently like a specific spicy scene, just because, you know, it gets to a point where if they want to talk about that later as players, they can do so. But inherently, as long as like everyone gets the gist that, you know, oh, they're starting a relationship or whatever, you know, that's cool too. They can do that. They are perfectly within their rights to do that, because all of the people that play in my games are over 18, over 20. More often than not, they end up in their mid-20s in my games. So you know, we're all adults. We can all kind of discuss that. We don't need to like. And, you know, everyone's got to be comfortable there. And those boundaries have to be respected as well. So, you know, because some people aren't comfortable with it. But yeah, and especially because, like, I know that there are people out there that play D&D that way. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine if that's the way they want to play their game. But generally, I tend to be more of, you know, a storytelling DM that... Obviously, romance and friendship and family and love is a part of the journey that's happening, kind of thing. And that's cool. That's fine. But yeah, there are just some things that you don't need to play out word for word if you don't need to, because everybody at the table is going to be comfortable. But yeah, no, like in general, I do tend to have, my stories do tend to be very much fantasy trope as well. I'm definitely going to say that I do still lean into the big, heavy fantasy trope that people expect to see in fantasy. So, you know, world-ending stuff. I don't ever expect my players to, like, they don't have to, their characters don't specifically have to want to be heroes, but they do have to be, like, and I don't insist that all my players be good or all my players be evil or anything like this, but they do have to be united in a goal. So, for example, for whatever reason, their own reasons, but for example, if, you know, they have to want to save the world. You know, so that they have that common goal. But, you know, for me, their motivations for why they want to save the world is exactly what we hear, like, telling the story of. Because in my worlds, that's a journey. It's not a, you know, the fact is, the reality is, and I think anyone who's read any kind of fantasy kind of stuff realize being the hero actually kind of sucks. Everybody else in the world reaps the benefits of the heroes saving the world, but it is rarely looked at, obviously, the toll that takes on the heroes themselves. And that's kind of where, you know, my story kind of comes in of, like, yeah, it's their hero's journey, them, you know, saving the world, them, you know, finding, you know, for whatever reason, like the characters, you know, we have an orphan who doesn't know where they came from, or, you know, for example, in the previous era, we had a player who, they were essentially a child prodigy when it came to, like, magic, to the point that when they were part of the world, they were essentially, they had become a war, like it was a time of war, and because of the way that they did magic and things like this, they were essentially a war general by the time they were 12 or 13. And so that character didn't really get a childhood, and, you know, was under the weight of the expectation. But also, it's not that they didn't want a childhood or anything like that. It's just more the fact that because of their studies, they didn't really know how to relate to other kids their age. They obviously didn't participate in the same level of studies. So, and it's not like all the kids, like, sure, some of the kids that were also at the wizarding school he was at, you know, were like the wizarding academy. Yeah, some kids were mean to him because, let's be honest, some kids are bullies. But it's more just the fact that he was just different, and he had different priorities, and he was meeting ascendant gods and things like this who walked in the world, and, you know, dealing with the armies and stuff. So, and like, that was a part of the story that turned out, and like, we didn't even play out this part of his story because this ended up being in his backstory, because the character he was actually playing, basically he was a tiefling. They found him floating face down in a swamp with amnesia, and he ended up having, because of the trauma of what had happened to him, he ended up having a split personality kind of thing, because it had all come about because he had turned around to this eldritch god known as the Elder Scribe, who he had basically, it was the one thing he kind of studied for himself. He had basically been teaching himself the Elder Script, which is a very, very ancient form of God language, essentially, that can change the fabric of the universe itself. And it was something he had kind of like stumbled upon, and not because he wanted power, and not because, you know, he didn't want the power to be powerful to take over the world or anything like that, but it was the one thing that he kind of did for himself. And because of that, he found out that his the ship he was on, the warship he was on, the people that were on it, he actually found out the night before they were about to set sail for this war effort that the ship was going to mutiny. But the problem is, he had also discovered how deep the conspiracy went, that, you know, how deeply intrinsic it had gotten, to the point that he couldn't, there is nothing he could say, like telling other people who were in like more of a position of power than him, telling them wouldn't help, it wouldn't change anything. And so he got onto the ship knowing that he was not going to make it. At 18, he got onto that ship knowing that he was not going to make it home that day. And when obviously the betrayal happened, he basically, because he didn't believe he was listening to the Elder God or anything like this. Like, he didn't, and obviously because they were very illogical, they didn't believe it was like an imaginary friend or something. He just thought it was like his subconscious. But in that moment, he basically threw it out into the universe of, please just help me help my people. And so this giant hand of God basically took him out of time. It effectively stopped the war at that point, and the peace effort happened after that, but nobody really knows what happened. But essentially this tiefling ended up spending a lot of time in the plane of dreams, didn't realize he was spending this time in the plane of dreams, healing, at least on a kind of physical level, until he woke up in a swamp with no memory of who he was, and he basically ended up learning that he was this war hero from 7,500 years prior, and no one knew what happened to him. But all it was him basically just, the last thing he vaguely remembered was a voice telling him that he could rest and recover, because this fight is over and I will take you to a time when you can actually help your people. And so he ended up being taken to the future. So... And yeah, and when he was found in the swamp, and that future was basically where he started in the campaign. And that was the start of his story, so it actually kind of started in the middle for him. And, you know, that all stemmed just from an opinion that he essentially... I had turned around to him and said, oh, well, what do you want your backstory to be, kind of thing. And I have a questionnaire which has about... I know it seems like a lot of questions, but it's like 40 questions on it. And some of those questions are legitimately things like, what's your name? How do you pronounce it? What is your character's physical description? But then it's things like, who were you raised by? Oh, that's a bit loud. I'm going to turn that music down just a bit, I think. How's that? It's also in my headphones just blasting. Yeah. Thought that might be a bit better. Yeah, I changed over the music we're playing at the moment. So we started off with some music by a YouTube channel called GameChops. Yeah. And so now we're just listening to some Chillhop music. We listen to a lot of lo-fi and just a lot of like really chill music. Recommend GameChops heavily though, if you like video game music and things like that. So yeah, so 40 questions, and it's really basic stuff. Yes, GameChops. They do lots of video game music, like the one we were listening to start with was like a Pokémon mix, which I love it. I start a lot of my streams with that one, just because it's a really nice, like, bit more high intensity. And then usually we kind of like span through a variety of things, like they've got Mario, I think they've got Seamus, they've got Zelda. So yeah, just really nice like mixes just to listen to and just kind of chill out to. Yeah, and obviously if you do stream your builds and things like this as well, a lot of their music as because obviously, and you know, I'm happy to help other streamers out with this. So GameChops music you can stream, you can put up on your YouTube channel. Obviously, you do have to give them a shout out linking back to their videos, just so that people can find them and listen to it and things like that. Chillhop, at least on Twitch, and there is a they do have their set rules that you can stream their music, but they have a specific banner that they want you to download and have displayed on your channel somewhere, which will obviously link people back to their service as well. Oh, it's nothing like that. Part of the reason I started map streaming is just legitimately the fact that I don't always sit down I don't always prioritize the map build and things like this. I also really enjoy making the towns and stuff, but I don't necessarily prioritize it. And so this is a really good way for me to force myself to sit down and build and just kind of chill, and also share with people like my experiences with building, the way that I see D&D, you know, meeting like-minded people. And because, you know, I mean, I know that over the last few months / years I've gotten a bit frustrated with some of the, not necessarily the rule sets that come out, because you know what, that in my opinion there is no right or wrong way to play D&D, as long as you are in a group that kind of has the same kind of ideas as you. You know, so there's no right or wrong way to play D&D. There are right and wrong groups for people, insofar as if you are just not gelling with a group, don't force yourself to stay there. I don't subscribe to the idea as there's no such thing. Like, I don't subscribe to the idea of no D&D is better than bad D&D, because I don't necessarily think there is bad D&D per se. It just means it's not your group, you know. And yeah, so I started streaming because obviously like, you know, I just wanted to talk D&D. I wanted to talk about, oh no, don't assume that I haven't had bad situations. I have very much been in situations as a DM where, you know, I've had situations where I realized I needed to grow as a DM, but also realizing too that sometimes some players that you have in a group just weren't for your group. Oh yeah, me too. Don't worry, Golden Glow. I have had my fair share of bad situations, bad games, bad D&D, you know, in that kind of concept. But in the benefit of hindsight, I've just realized that maybe that it wasn't the group for them. Yeah. I mean, my process because I've only ever run online games, I've never actually run in person. And my process, so I run through Roll20 primarily. Well, I say primarily, but that's all I've ever run through. So when I put up a game advertisement looking for people, what I mostly ask for, and I do have a pretty detailed kind of like description of what I'm offering. And obviously then, you know, and I've come under fire for doing this, but I essentially turn around and say, okay, this is what I need from you as a potential player, as in, I don't care if it's not the character that you want to play in the game. I just want to see what your character concepts are like, you know? So just give me a character concept, you know, just maybe one or two small, like very small paragraph story, and just kind of like a character concept, so I can see what your style is like, what you're looking for. I value consistency, which is I usually run my games weekly. For very specifically, it's about 3 hours. We don't usually go beyond that, and because of that, like a majority of my games have lasted over a year, over 3 years, with pretty much almost playing every week, apart from over the Christmas holidays, which we do take essentially a month and a half to 2 months off over the Christmas break. But that's not to say we don't get together and play one-shots and things like this, or play other games. We play Xbox together. You know, it's kind of become a little community. And unfortunately, with setting up those kind of communities as well, it does come with the fact that if you end up spending a lot of time with each other, or, you know, sometimes our own mental health as well doesn't play nice with other people's mental health issues. And that can happen, especially if you spend a lot of time together, which has been sometimes the case of what has happened with me. You know, oversharing and things like this can happen, and, you know, but when it comes specifically to D&D, it is because I've had those groups, it has led to me to a lot of my own kind of ways that I run now. So yeah, so I'll do this thing where I'll ask for a base thing, and then if, you know, I like your style or whatever, or, you know, the kind of like the way that you write or something like this, I will turn around and go, hey, like, I'd like to interview you. I hate calling it an interview, but it's more just, I just want to have a chat with you so you can have a bit of a chat to me. Usually I'd like to do it in a group setting with some of the people that, especially if I already have some players for the game or in the game, you know, I know that can kind of be confronting meeting a group of strangers online. Yeah, and that kind of is the part that ends up happening. And obviously because of my bad experiences, it has led to a very strong opinion that I and now my group of players and acquaintances and friends that we play with, we have this very strong opinion that it is a game. If it is causing you stress, and I'm not talking like in-game stress, because yeah, it's a role-playing game, it's going to cause you a level of stress, but if it's actually causing you like physical stress that's actually affecting you mentally, like, it's just a game. And that's not to say we don't get invested in our characters and things like this, but real life will always come first for us now. So, for example, if you are struggling at work or school or whatever, and you just, for whatever reason, you just can't do it that week. It has been a shithouse week. You love your D&D, but you just want to go to bed because you're over the day. As long as you, like, even if it's like a minute before the game, like, yeah, I'm going to be a little frustrated because obviously it's hard doing things at the last minute, but at the same time, I'm never going to actually get mad at you for turning around and going, hey, I'm not going to make it tonight. As long as you let me know, you know? I would much prefer you to take the night off, rest, feel better, do what you need first and foremost, because the game will never be more important than your real life. We all get together because we love telling a story. This is the way that we relax. But it means then, obviously, like, and that's not to say as well, like, I do allow my characters, my player characters, they're allowed to argue amongst themselves in character. They are allowed to have disagreements. They are allowed to fight. The only rule we have straight up is they're not allowed to kill each other. And so, you know, I encourage them to talk to each other outside of the game if they want to, like, if their characters want to have like a scuffle where they get into fights, where they come to blows, because I would much prefer them to discuss where that kind of end point is for them. But, you know, it is the fact that they still have to actually get along and they have to figure out a way past it. And, you know, that's not to say that they can't have those arguments, but they're straight up not allowed to kill each other, because all that does is going to breed animosity. But also, if you do get into a fight in game with each other, and I understand, like, I'm a person that it's not always possible for me to walk away from the table straight away and be like absolutely 100% chill, because I get very passionate about it. But at the same time, you can't then turn around and be absolutely heinous to the people around you, because at the end of the day, it's not a real person. You have to take the real people's feelings into consideration before the character. So, you know, as long as you kind of like walk away from the table after you've had like a 5-minute breather after the game or whatever, or, you know, and just be like, you know, like, are you okay? I'm sorry if I, you know, because, and these things have happened. Like, people get angry in game, they get frustrated and say things that they shouldn't because they're under stress, and that's cool. But at the end of the day, we're real people playing a game, and that should never be more important. Like, as in, the game should never be more important than like upsetting the real life person. Like, my viewpoint as the DM is, I don't want to kill your characters. Like, I'm not out there gunning to kill your characters. But but I do have to be, like, the point, you're a ghost playing the game. God, I've never played a ghost in the game. I can say that most of my characters do tend to be sometimes end up being we all bring a part of ourselves into our characters, and one thing that I kind of end up struggling to do is I don't want to make mistakes as a player. I don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to do things. And so my character will be very overly cautious and try and get all the answers and, get as much information before making a decision. So my characters can come across as a little bit know-it-all-y. So that can be a bit of an issue that comes up. And obviously because of that, the characters can seem stuck up and things like this. At the moment, the two characters that I am playing, because I play over on, it's one of the moderators of this channel, my friend Evil One. I play over on his channel. We have a D&D game, which we are all grung, so we are all frog people. And it started out as a one-shot, so I'm a wild magic sorcerer who is all about the grung uprising and grung supremacy. It's not the character that I would normally play for a long-term campaign, but here we are. And she is just a little chaos monkey. We roll for stats, so she has 6 intelligence. So she's a bit stupid, but it's fun. And we're playing a Star Wars game on Sunday nights as well. So, in which I play a Jawa who is loyal but has an obsession with droids. So I'm kind of playing a couple of chaotic characters now, and I miss playing a long form D&D game where I can actually create this a bit more of a deeply nuanced character that I want to play. But this happens sometimes. This game that I'm designing is going to be starting up on the stream in February. So that will be good. Over on Evil One's stream in the new year, in the next couple of months in the new year, we are going to be streaming a Power Rangers game. I will be playing the Blue Ranger in that. And that is the Power Rangers game. I'm not 100% sure. The Power Rangers is a completely different RPG. Yes, the Power Rangers role-playing game. It's by Renegade Studios. Oh, I am 100% behind this opinion that you don't... Yeah, it's really, really great to play a character who's... it's really interesting getting to play a character who kind of reacts on instinct as opposed to overthinking everything. As I said before, a big personal character trait, real world trait, is that I am a chronic overthinker. And so it's nice getting to just do the instinctive thing that you would do, or doing the really literal thing, and that's been really great. And it's nice getting to do that once in a while, or just playing something you wouldn't necessarily play. As I said, we always roll for stats in my game and in Evil One's games. What that does mean is obviously we usually go the standard 4d6d1. But we have put in a secondary rule with that insofar as you have to have a minimum of, I think it's 71 points, which, you know, still gives you that possibility of having the bad rolls and yeah, exactly. And having those moments where your team realizes that they can rely on you and things like that, those moments are just as important. Like those moments are just as important to me as, you know, the paladin who's sacrificing themselves so that their party can escape and things like that. Like, that's great, and everyone loves those moments as well. Like, I definitely say that those moments still have merit and things like this. It is also nice letting other characters find their place, find their moment, you know, allow them to be the heart of the group, allow them to, yeah. I always feel like, at least because of the way that I run my games, I like it that my players' characters have the room to grow. Like, give your character the option to grow and discover who they are through the adventure, as opposed to coming in with, this is my character and they are never going to change ever, kind of thing. I do not like power gamers in my game. I understand that, you know, it's really cool being like figuring out all the absolute numbers and being powerful and things like that. Like, I don't have any issue with that per se. But personally, for my games, for people who optimize their character to never fail, to always be fantastic at everything they do, I don't understand the appeal of that, insofar as, like, yeah, you're going to enjoy it, but like, your character never failing at anything because you've made it impossible numerically to do so. Like, as a DM, where is the fun in that? I don't want to, and especially if, like, the rest of the party hasn't optimized or whatever, then there becomes that such level disparity that, and I've seen this happen, that parties have gotten annoyed because, well, what's the point of them doing anything because this one person is just going to be able to fix everything or do everything, or, you know. Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I have that questionnaire. It actually, like I said, it asks questions like, oh, you know, who are your parents, who were you raised by? But then it asks questions like, what do your parents do? What was your relationship like with your parents? Do you have any other siblings or people you're close to? And it is a situation that you can answer it with. It is perfectly capable and very easy to do that. You can do it that, you know, you just do really simple one sentence answers and stuff like that. And that's okay too. But the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. Unless you are specifically, like, I do have a couple of players whose opinions are legitimately, like, they, a lot of the times will either write amnesia stories, or they will, like, straight up kill off all of their family and friends. But, you know, obviously over time I've played with them long enough now to know and understand that what they're basically saying is, and I will still actually check in with them now. Before, I will usually, especially if it's going to be something that's going to be big and impactful to your character, there are some things where I do end up, I know that some people are probably against this idea of spoiling the surprise, But for example, if there is a possibility of, like, for example, mind control in the game, I will actually discuss with the player in question before I do it. Like, you know, but that's part of, like, part of why I have a session 0. But also it's a little bit of, there are times where I will say to a player before I do something, I'm like, hey, this is what I'm thinking for your character story. Are you okay if I do this? Because, for example, I don't know because we play online and like I said before, we're strangers a lot of the time. I've literally just met some of these people, so I don't know your life. I don't need to know the in-depth of everything about your life or your real world experiences if you don't want to share them. That's none of my business if you don't want to share them. But there is a level where you have to be like, hey, like, I don't want to go into it, but I can't handle if you do this kind of stuff to me. And then, you know, there might be a bit of a discussion of, like, is there a line of that? Or, well, but then again, you know, we've had players who don't like spiders but didn't realise how arachnophobic they were until they faced a spider in game and there was a token of a spider on the map and they couldn't even look at the screen. And they turned around to the DM, like, when they took a break or whatever, and they're like, I can't handle this. Like, it you know, I knew that I didn't like spiders, but I didn't know how bad it was. And so ever since then, if you're an arachnophobic or whatever or something like that happens, instead of using a spider token, we will use a token of Kermit the Frog. Rather than removing the actual creature itself, you know, it's not going to kill anyone to have to use their imaginations to imagine a spider over, you know, if it means that one other person is comfortable. You know, there is for me, there is a level of suspended disbelief, insofar as, like, insofar as you have to kind of be aware that, like, the rules exist, but very much in my games. Yeah, I know. In my games, very much, it is a very heavy, the rules are a guideline within reason. Like, obviously, for mechanical standpoints and stuff like this, there are areas where obviously I do have a bit of leeway and things like that. But once kind of a decision is made or whatever, and that can change on the fly, but, you know, it's usually, I'm not going to, depending on what it is, I very much believe in the rule of cool. You know, we're playing a fantasy game. Everyone wants to feel like a superhero, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I do have issues if you do try to take that moment from somebody else. You know, because everybody in the game, like, everybody who has come into my game has earned a place there, as in they all went through the same process. They all had to interview. They all had to do this. So if you're, like, consistently creating situations where you're trying to fix every situation, or you're, you know, making it so that, or you take a moment that's set for another player character. Like, I've had one player character who, they ended up in a situation where they were facing off against an enemy, and it was in a really corrupt situation. They'd been invited to an entertainment where, sorry, I'm just writing down the values there, and I cannot write and talk at the same time. So yeah, there was this moment where this one particular player character had, in their backstory, been part of a rebellion against these evil entities. And because of the machinations of the game that they were in, they ended up in a situation where they had to be courteous. They had been invited to an entertainment held by these people. And so he had to be polite. Except they basically put it in his hands about what he was going to do about a certain situation. As in, I think it was somebody was getting whipped. And like for the player, like this was a really stressful situation because, you know, he'd been a freedom fighter. He had been part of a group of people who had been trying to stop these kind of atrocities, this kind of entertainment. And so this was a huge part of his life. And so this was very confronting for him. And that moment was absolutely stolen from him when another player was basically like, yeah, but you don't understand what it means to me and my character. And, you know, at the time, like, and this is one of the things about, you know, like I said, a learning curve for me, was I should have stepped in and been like, you know, I understand, but this is obviously such and such's moment. And I should have controlled the situation a little bit better than I did. But so in the end, the player who it was for just ended up really annoyed because, like, they were really struggling. They wanted a chance to figure out how their character was dealing with it, how they were being confronted with it. And this one player just kept turning around and saying that, like, yeah, but you don't understand what it means to me and my character. And like, for me, that's a level where you kind of have to be aware that you're working as a group. You're supposed to be a team, but obviously the way that the story is being told is there are things in this. Yeah, exactly. And I will say though, this player the player in question did have a habit of making scenes about themselves. Like, even if it didn't necessarily pertain to them, they were a bit of a scene hog. And, you know, and it's one of those examples, in my opinion, though, where you do have to be a little bit mindful that you are playing a game with other people as well. Like, just be aware that not every moment is going to be for you. But also, yeah, take it as an opportunity. Like, I'm not saying that they couldn't. I'm definitely not saying that they couldn't turn around and go, well, this obviously is impactful to my character too. That wasn't the issue. But it was not necessarily the time or the place for them. Like, they were more focused on going, yes, but pay attention to my character and the way it's affecting me, as opposed to the person who is in the scene, who is a freedom fighter, who is being handed the whip saying, yeah, we need you to whip this person for us. If you don't. And it could have led to the death of the rest of the party if they didn't comply, basically. And so they were in this extremely stressful situation where they had to navigate that. And this other person was just like, yeah, but you don't understand what it means to me. Yeah, cool. Have your moment. Like, turn around, hyperventilate, all this kind of stuff. Help the other people navigate that as well. You're a group. It's a team game, you know. And that was kind of more my perspective on it of, yeah, no one's saying that this person wasn't allowed to have their moment. They weren't allowed to feel what they were feeling because, yeah, of course they were. You know, it was designed to be a whole situation that was traumatic kind of thing. So, but find a way to involve the other players too, because it's a team game. it's the same way as well. Like, I agree. You should do what your character's going to do, but not to the detriment of other real world people's fun. Yeah, I have kind of realized that it does seem to be a predominantly online thing. I at least have, because I do play with people who have played a lot of online, real world games as well. And they kind of have echoed that sentiment that when they, and I think what part of it is obviously because, you know, not every game online that you play is going to have cameras and things like that. So some of it can just legitimately be general error insofar as you can't see body language. So cutting people off, talking over people, things like that, it does tend to happen a lot more online, just because you can't see that somebody's about to speak and stuff. And, you know, you work your way around that. But I have also discovered, and this is from my perspective, obviously, like I have very high functioning anxiety, but I don't necessarily get socially anxious, but I have noticed as well that online, because you don't have to go out and deal with people all the time in this particular sphere, you end up and that's exactly it, and that tends to be what happens. And that's kind of linking back to what I said earlier about not every group is going to be for every person, but also when you get a group of people together who have their own traumas, their own mental illnesses, or even, you know, or just their own issues going on, they don't necessarily play well with other people's social anxieties, you know, mental illnesses and things like this. And if you spend a lot of time together and you get like heavily invested in and things like this, and this is part of the reason why we've kind of like started heavily leaning into that it's just a game situation of, you know, the DM isn't like the DM isn't always out to get you. I'm not saying that they're, you know, one, like, I know that there are stories out there that where people have encountered terrible DMs in terms of just really awful situations at a game table and things like that. And yes, that is horrible. You should never have to experience an opportunity like that where you are being belittled or made to feel terrible or anything like that. Like, and this is why, you know, we have this very strong belief of it's just a game now. Because, yeah, I have had my fair share of people I've run into where, you know, people who make mistakes on the internet. You know, not everybody you encounter on the internet is out to get you. Not everybody is deliberately being toxic or awful, or, you know, they're not out to get you to make you feel shit or terrible. Not everybody is trying to gaslight you. And that's something I've kind of run into as well, of that the term gaslighting is being used very colloquially, because the reality is not everybody in the world is setting out to deliberately like deceive you, trick you, make you feel terrible, make you question your own sanity. Like, legitimately, some people that you are going to encounter are also struggling, and they're never like, I know that, and I will say this, you know, with some of, you know, the people I play with, my friends that I play with, I do not always say the right thing. I do not always have the perfectly curated answer. I do not, like, even though I'm the DM, I'm still a fucking person. Like, I don't know how to handle every situation socially. And I have made mistakes where I have asked players to change a character concept so that they fit in better with a group, which, you know, in retrospect now, I know that I should never have done that. Like, there are situations where I'm like, I need to do better. I recognize that as well. But at the same time, you know, I've been called toxic. I've been called gaslighting. I've been told that I've been gaslighting people because, you know, but a lot of the times for me, I'm trying to hold my group together. I don't always say the right thing. I get flustered. I think a lot of people forget that most people are just normal people who are just trying their best. And, you know, sometimes people are just going to have a bad day. So, and yeah, just as you pointed out, Golden Glow, if they're not happy, you know, they end up just leaving and going to another server, or, you know, and so they end up in this echo chamber, in this tunnel where they're so used to either getting what they want but that's also why I turned around and said, you know, there's no such thing as a bad D&D game or a bad group. More often than not, it's just you don't get along with that group, and that's okay. It is okay to leave a game that you are not happy in. And this has happened in a couple of my games where I'm like, if you are like, and it has come out, and the players have turned around and gone, you know, oh, you did this and you did that and you were a horrible person and yada, yada, yada. And part of me is just like, if you are that unhappy, why are you still here? Why are you getting, like, I can understand if I've legitimately done something wrong as the DM and I've pushed a boundary for you that I maybe shouldn't have pushed or something like that. Like, sure, come to me, talk to me about it. Because more often than not, I don't know that I've done that. But at the same time, if you are legitimately that unhappy with every single ruling I'm making as a DM, why are you still here? And it's generally, it seems to be something along the lines of, oh, but I wanted to keep playing with the people that I was playing with. Okay, I get that. But I'm still the DM of this game. So what you're saying is you have a problem with me as the DM, but you want to kick me out of the group. You know? And so I don't understand people who stay in a game and then turn around and go, yeah, but you're the problem because you're gaslighting me, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're being a toxic person because you're not taking my feelings into consideration. At the end of the day, a lot of people need to remember, and a lot of these people have never DM'd before either, and so a lot of these people need to remember, yes, I care about you. Yes, I care about your feelings and how you're feeling in relation to the game, but I also have usually 4, 5, 6 other people in a game that I also have to take into consideration. You know, not every time a DM says no is because they don't want you to have something, or, you know, sometimes they legitimately say no because, like, I do try to say yes because I think that's important. But sometimes a DM just has to say, no, you cannot have the crazy thing that you're trying to do. And just because they say no, they don't hate you. They, you know. And obviously, you know, I know that that's not necessarily the truth of every DM or every situation, you know. But generally, most people who are playing D&D are playing because they want to tell a story. They want to have fun. They want to play with people. They want to tell a story. And, you know, again, I will say it over and over and over again. I am in no means a perfect player. I am in no means a perfect DM. You know, I have messed up. I will very happily admit, while I really enjoy storytelling, I still need to work on running combat better. I'm not great with numbers. I'm sometimes really bad at taking notes, and people hear that and go, yeah, but you've got all this world lore. Yeah, it's easy to remember when I've written it. Yeah, everyone has to understand. That is exactly it, Golden Glow. Everyone has to understand the limits of yes. I want to give my players the world. And this is coming from me. I've given my players in games I've given them lightsabers. I've given them the ability to make C4. And, because I spend all these hours making these world maps and town maps and everything. But I will 100% tell my players, I do not give a shit if you come into my world and you destroy it. Because it's a world on paper. I can always recreate it, I would much prefer that my players do something. I would much prefer that my players get to have fun. But that doesn't mean, while they're having fun, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are free from the consequences of the fun that they are trying to have. For example, you can't just go around blowing up a town and expect there to be no repercussions of that. So in my games, I still obviously, and I say obviously, but because obviously you've never been here talking to me, Golden Glow, I still use, I don't say race, I do say species. That's because I've got a lot of, I like the idea of them not burning it all down. That would also be great as well. But, sometimes that's not possible. But yes, so I say species, not races, because I have a lot of species in my world and they're not all humanoid. But yeah, I actually prefer species, subspecies. I feel I have, especially online, it separates from the discussion of the race discussion and racial discussion and racism in general. But I like there to be the differences between the species. So I do still use ability score modifiers, racial modifiers, which is not my way to, obviously that's not to say that you can't play your orc wizard, but I'm also not telling you where you have to put your stats, but maybe you play your character suboptimally. I'm not a DM, because I'm not a very strong combat DM, really. I also don't go out of my way to punish players who have built suboptimally or whatever. But I also don't believe that having to overcome adversity is a bad thing. Your character having to struggle to have achieved something in life. Well, that's exactly it. That is exactly it, Golden Glow. Because at the end of the day, my world is a completely made-up world. It is clearly not a Wizards of the Coast setting. And I will say this, that I don't, my worlds do not have any correlation to real world races. That being said, obviously I have taken inspiration from other cultures to create specific cultures within my world. But for example, one thing I don't buy into, and this is seen systematically throughout my world, just because a race is tribalistic it is not synonymous with them being a savage. For example, my orcs in my world have very strong Scottish kind of clan connotations with the way that they see family, the way they behave, the way that they have tests of strength, kind of like the Highland Games and things like this. But because of they are from obviously these hotter parts where there are deserts and things like this, they actually have a lot of Arabic culture tied into them as well. And yeah, so there are cultures in my world that they will have other ways to imbibe certain things, but alcohol might be banned from that area, you know. So they, like, my parties can go to a tavern and there are, you know, things that they can smoke, things that they can do this, yada yada yada, but they can't drink, you know. And I have those aspects. I have cultures in my world that have strong Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai. Like I said, I love real world mythos. I love real world cultures and actually exploring those cultures and understanding those cultures. And when I emulate them in my game for different races and species, I want to do it in a respectful way as well, because I want those, I want that to be that distinct reference of the world is vast, people are vast. The way people grow up dictates more, like, sure, there is a level of geneticism about it in terms of, like, yeah, orcs are strong, so they get a +2 to strength racially. But at the same time, an orc who grew up, say, in the Feywild is going to be different from an orc that grew up in the material plane. You know, all of the characters that will be playing in this game, all of their characters were born in the Feywild. So regardless of whether they're human, because there will be Feywild humans, I'm not allowing variant human, because there are actual stat blocks for, like, racial modifiers and things like this for each version of the human that comes from, so the humans who come from hell, the humans that come from the material plane, the humans that come from the Feywild, they all have different rates, so there's no reason for them to be a just standard variant human. You know, what I care more about is, okay, you want this for your character. I don't have a problem with people flavor texting stuff. You can flavor text till the cows come home, as long as it's not changing something mechanically. But if there is something mechanically that you want to change, I'm not anti-homebrew, but if there is something that you want to play at my table that is not standard, and obviously I have created, like, I say created, but the options that people have for playable races and species in my world, you know, there's a lot of, I have also added a lot of homebrew or third-party races. So we are seeing a lot of races from Hellianas. I've got a player who's going to be in this game playing a raccoonkin from Hellianas. So he's a raccoon. Yeah, and that's exactly it, Golden Glow. That is exactly it, and that's why I decided this time around with what I'm doing with this is there are options. There are so many options that it's unnecessary in my world. And I know that there are going to be people that will upset people because, you know, they want to find a game. And I know that, for example, just by listening to me talk over the last hour or so, my world is very deep world lore. Also, I don't ever expect anyone to remember all of the world lore because there is a lot of it, and that would be psychotic. But, you know, I don't care if you want to optimize your character. I don't care if you want to power game your you know, as long as you can tell me from a story perspective why your character has the things they do in a way that makes sense. And that is an area where I have had players stumble on that. Like, they've had to explain how they end up with their multi-builds, yada, yada, yada. But then, you know, like, you can do whatever you want in my world, but do not expect that it's going to free you from the consequences of your actions. You will face adversity in my world. A couple of things that people don't really face per se, not because they're not in the world, but because I don't make them, like, it doesn't make sense in my world with the world lore I've got. For example, Gender politics, sexuality issues coming up. They don't come up. It doesn't make sense. Issues around descendancy and things like that don't really happen because at least two of the gods, at least from this portion timeline of the world, it doesn't make sense. For example, they are heavy believers in found family. If somebody is adopted into a family, it is a true adoption. They are as blood. Because, for example, the head god of the pantheon was a Tortle monk. He was a Tortle child who was essentially left on the steps of a temple, and he was raised by the masters of the temple, and that temple was his family. The party that he ended up traveling with, they became as family. And he ended up ascending to the head god of the pantheon. He is the god of balance and order, and he is also the patron saint of cage fighters. Long story. But also the goddess of love. She's the goddess of love and chaos. And she was born because an alchemist basically his love for his daughter was so great that he tore open death to save her from it. And that act of love, it actually created the human embodiment of love itself in this goddess of chaos and love. And a lot of people have turned around, like, there are people who are like, what do you mean the goddess of chaos and love? Like, how can you have that? But it is that fact that she is the goddess of all kinds of love, except sexual love. There is actually a different goddess for that altogether. But it's that idea of, and her whole thing was she had to hold together the gods of death who had been basically displaced and didn't know they were the gods of death. But she saw them as her family. They were her sisters, her brothers, and she was the only one who understood and knew what happened. And she basically had to find them, keep them safe, hold them all together until the thing that had happened, the tear had been repaired, and they remembered who they were, even though she knew that once the tear was repaired, she would vanish. But the point was, she had shown them such love over the time that she had protected them, that it was that concept of, even if I'm gone, I'm never truly gone. As long as you remember me, you will, and you keep me in your heart, I will always exist. And this is how obviously she became a goddess. She was a concept of something that ascended to a deification situation. And she's obviously going to play a part in this. Not that there is going to be heavy ties to the gods because of the merge. There is actually going to be true clerics are going to be rare because the connection to the celestial plane has been, it is being held on by a very hair string tether. But both of those characters were once player characters. Like, I really care about, I care about my players' characters, even once, regardless of how, our friendship or them leaving my table or anything happened, I will generally want to respect those characters, because it doesn't matter how long or short somebody was at my table for. The fact is, they came in, they spent time, effort, all of those kind of things. They invested in the world. They invested time in the world, and that's important to me, regardless of how that relationship was. And so, I respect the characters. I respect the players that had been part of my world, regardless of however, whether we had a falling out or not, especially because some of these people I had played with for years. So this candy-coloured nightmare that is gluttony. basically, I just want to tell a game, and it is a fantasy game. It is a heavy fantasy game. There are no real world connotations. However, if there is something that somebody finds like deeply offensive for whatever reason, obviously I am happy to be educated. You know, I am definitely not the leading expert in any way stretch of imagination about every culture on the planet. Yeah, it is a little bit like that. It's really fun creating these like little sand dunes of like these colours. There's something really like kind of peaceful and satisfying about it. And on top of that, I'm going to be putting in, I think, where was it? So yeah, this is, if you don't have the Pro, this is kind of like all the assets that you can kind of see. 35, so we'll just so in Gluttony, I think I was explaining the last time I streamed that what I was thinking with Gluttony was, if you are familiar with Enid Blyton's The Magic Faraway Tree, there is a land called the Land of Goodies, in which everything in that land is edible. The people, the buildings, everything is edible. And I figured Gluttony would be like that. Not just is everything edible, but also having that level of the White Witch from Narnia with the Turkish Delight. If people are not familiar with the story of it, because it wasn't very well explained in the movie, but the Turkish Delight was actually cursed, so that you would want to keep eating it, and you would want to eat more and more and more, and it was this obvious temptation to, like, you would do anything to have more of it. And so that's kind of what I figured the circle of gluttony is like. You can eat everything. Yeah. And obviously there is the little jokes about cannibalism, obviously. But it is possible to play a playable Fey race. In the Feywild map, there is actually an area in the Feywild, which is also a kind of like edible place, kind of like this, but a bit more like a Candyland kind of aspect, and slightly less, cursed like hell, where it's called the Sweetfields, where whoever's going to be playing in this game can potentially play a race of, like, they can play a race of gummy people, or like essentially it's a food fairy, like an Alcrem. So there are possibilities of playing like edible races in my world. Which of course, life expectancy when you're a race of people that taste delicious, as you can imagine, is great. But I have actually added as well, within those playable races, I've also added some different sub races of, like, for example, I have created and obviously if people decide to play these races as well, I will have document links to where my inspiration or what I am using can be found, so people can go back and reference it themselves, or go to the creator and that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. But for example, the Aarakocra, instead of just being the eagle type Aarakocra that we see a lot in D&D, we have everything from, now I think there's like blue jay, cassowary, penguin, peacock, parrot, ibis, so I wanted to have that ability to kind of like see that and play with that, and you know what? I didn't put the Potu in. I didn't make an owl version of the Aarakocra though, because I'm allowing obviously the Owlin. But obviously some of the newer races that we're seeing in Wizards of the Coast stuff, because of the way that I am playing it, obviously I'm having to go through and figure out what their stat blocks would be and, making them. But for example, if you play a cassowary Aarakocra, you don't get a fly speed, clearly. If you're not aware, the cassowary is an Australian flightless bird, similar to the emu or the ostrich. But they're essentially a modern living dinosaur almost. They have this horned crest on their head. They are very territorial, very vicious to a certain degree, as long as, they do get a kick attack. I believe one of their attacks is legit, I think, which I found hilarious. It was called Stomp Stomp Bitch. So, which I thought was awesome. For example, a penguin Aarakocra, they don't have a very fast walking speed, but they can vary in size, because obviously I wanted there to be the option to be like, give different sizes of like fairy penguin-esque to, your emperor penguin, that kind of thing. So I wanted that capability to be there. And so that was fun. But they do get an awesome swim speed. And also when they're in the snow and ice, they may not be very fast walkers, but they can get down on their belly and like ski along, which gives them like a 45 feet movement speed or something like that when they're doing that. Because I wanted them to be cool. Like, there have to be incentives to be playing like, all of these different races. So, in the material plane, an Aarakocran sub-race that I am actually going to be allowing is the owlbear. The owlbear Aarakocra, because technically they're a bird. I'm also allowing the bearkin. So you can play a panda, you can play a brown bear, a black bear, a koala. One race I've put in is the Cockade, which is a race of fey dog people, but they're not just corgis, they're also like they are also things like, your Dobermans and things like that. There will not be tabaxis in the Feywild, because there is a race of shape-shifting fey cats known as the Kate She. So they can appear as human. There are obviously going to be kitsune, there are fairies, there are pixies, which are going to be different from the Wizards of the Coast fairies and pixies. I'm also allowing the Dullahan, so your headless horseman kind of aspect. Because I figured if you're going to be playing in the Feywild, you should have a whole heap of fey races. I'm also allowing the Herringon, but again with modifications. So there is a level of like Jade Rabbit-esque to at least one of the sub-races, I believe. So Dragonborn also are different. Like the Dragonborn for the Feywild are not your chromatic or your metallic Dragonborn. They are your sub-races for that are Fairy Dragonborn, Pseudo Dragonborn, Gem Dragonborn, and Shadow Dragonborn. So they're all possibilities. So yeah, I do. It has been a very ambitious endeavour, basically, to create this fey racial document. But, for example, that's not negating. If somebody wants to play somebody who comes from like the Hells or the Material Plane, I have little subsects for that as well, but I'm also not going to create them unless someone specifically wants something from there. Because that's just an effort in madness, otherwise we'll never play. And also because the world lore. has established how these characters are different, how these, like, for example, the Asima. Some Asima still live on the material plane, but predominantly most of them have moved to the Hells, because obviously the Hells is a lawful plane of existence, but also because of the world law, a lot of the Asima of this world have actually been corrupted by demons, because they've had demonic ties, basically. Okay. So I think that I'm just trying to figure out if it looks organic enough, because obviously my biggest concern is obviously if it looks deliberately thing. Obviously I've left a lot of room here, but these will actually end up being forest, like very filled in forests, but I won't do them until it's part of the bigger map. So I suppose the next thing to look at then is, what are we going to do for the greed? Got some mountains in already. That's cool. I don't think I want too many sandhills. See, these are really cool. I'll have fun using that when we get to like those town maps and things like this. See, these are top-down trees. They're only green. I don't really want to put in more mountains per se. Some of these crystals are cool. Crystals and blue crystals, but I might actually... It is greed, so it's not just gold, but... change the hue, I think. Got some green, I think. I'll go down to make them smaller. I want a larger cluster. And this is basically the part of the stream where I just talk to myself and basically figure out what I'm kind of doing. But because it's greed, I think I'm going to put a whole heap of crystals in. I'll go a few different colours, and then maybe which of course you should always write down the values, so I know what I'm going to be doing on the rest of the map. What's another good crystal colour then? No, that's all right. Absolutely fine. Put in some red crystals as well, I think. Crystals. I will say I love the DYNAMAXED one, and also Nuke and Chill are really good ones that I usually start listening to just to kind of get me pumped up to start with. Something vaguely pebbly like. This one. No, I'll have to check that out. Thank you for letting me know about that Golden Glow. I will definitely have to check it out though, because trust me, anything that makes my life easier in building these maps, yeah, I'm all for. It sounds like it. It definitely sounds like a really good asset. So I am going to 100% check it out. Shalakard. Yeah, getting there. The campaign itself is looking to start in February, so very much looking forward to that. And obviously we will be streaming that here on Saturday nights. So I'm definitely hoping that you know, some of you are going to want to join and actually watch that, which would be great.
What are you doing, man? Are we gonna kick a beat or what?
Oh, that's epic. I hope you had fun. I've just been hanging out here with Tape Player and Golden Glow. It's been a great time. Oh yeah. That sounds like fun. Tingle smoke, God. I'm just finishing up shortly. I'm just getting these last little things in, I think, for this particular map of Greed. I'm glad. This is part of the reason that I do like streaming, is it inspires other TMs that, hey, at least we can all sit down together, talk about D&D related things, and not only that, you know, create our own stuff. Finish up these few golden shadow trees for greed. Then I think we'll be done for the day. I will be back doing more maps building stream on Wednesday night, because at the moment it is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me here in Australia. So I usually stream once a fortnight in the evenings for about 4 hours on the Wednesday night. You can find that information down in my About section. And so that will tell you when I'm streaming. I will be back tomorrow doing more of my Boomeadow plays, and we're going to be starting a new game, I think. I think I'm going to be streaming Lost in Random on Tuesdays going forward for a little bit. Unless, you know, we decide otherwise. But yes, so I'll be back map building on Wednesdays. Boomeadow plays. At the moment we'll be playing Lost in Random on Tuesday, and Lost Words on Thursdays, which is a beautiful little game if you like that kind of stuff. And normally I will be streaming on Saturday nights now as well, but not this week as I have a family event going on. However, thank you for joining me today. It has been absolutely wonderful having you here as I continue to build the Hells and build that up and actually get to participate in that with you. And having you here is always wonderful. If you like what I do and you are not already following me, please hit that follow button and turn on notifications so you know when I go live. It was fun hanging out with you too, Golden Glow. And thank you for the follow. If you miss any of my streams, you can find them over on my YouTube channel of the same name, Boomeadow. And if I randomly decide not to stream because I have whatever else going on, you can find all of those updates on my Twitter, which is Boomeadow. Otherwise, it has been absolutely wonderful having you here. And I will see you either tomorrow or Wednesday or whenever you manage to drop on by next time. Either way, it will be wonderful when I see you again next. Otherwise, have a great, wonderful morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world. Remember to drink water, look after yourself, get plenty of rest, and I will see you all later. Bye.